Thanks for inviting me to come into Cheney School and talk to you guys. It's been a really interesting morning and I hope you find the session interesting too. My name's Sarah and I look after the education team at the Museum of Natural History in Oxford. And in this session, I'm going to talk for about 10-15 minutes or so, and then I'm going to give you an activity to have a go at, and then we'll talk for 10-15 minutes or so at the end. I'm going to share my screen and start off by telling you a little bit about the museum. So just bear with me a second and hopefully everyone can see that. Now my Google Meet has completely disappeared and I can't see the chat, but I'm going to try and get that back. Okay, let me stop sharing. This didn't happen earlier on. Right, okay. I'll try sharing again. Right, okay, can everybody see my screen? Can you just put yes in the chat if you can see my screen and you can see me and hear me? Brilliant, okay. So I work at Oxford University Museum of Natural History and I'm sure lots of you have been there. It's a public facing part of Oxford University and it's a beautiful place to work. It's a beautiful building on the outside, as you can see here, and beautiful on the inside. And it's packed with objects from nature. We've got close to 7 million specimens in the collection. And when you Google a museum sort of Google images, so my Teams has just completely disappeared again. I'll try and get you back. I'm really sorry, I don't know what's going on. When you Google images of the museum, you might get the impression that we're just dinosaurs. We have got a lot of dinosaurs and they are popular. We've got some really important scientific dinosaurs. This one right in the middle here is the jaw of Megalosaurus, and that was the first scientifically described dinosaur. There is a lot of dinosaurs, but we're more than that. We're famous for the dodo. We've got lots of taxidermy. We've got lots of insects and it's a vibrant place to work. We've got lots of researchers too. This is a couple of our researchers. Lauren, she is a researcher that investigates the evolution of vision and the nervous system. Her research interest is mainly spiders, but she investigates other invertebrates as well. Ricardo is another one of our research fellows, and he investigates animals trapped in amber. So this is a tick from a piece of amber that's around 40 million years old, and he uses lots of different techniques to study those. So we've got a really vibrant team of people, as well as there's objects in the museum. But thinking about just the objects, we've got around 7 million objects from nature, and around 5 million of those are creepy crawlies of one sort or another. So we've got loads of insects. And when you've got that many insects, you have to divide them into groups according to the features they share. And they're divided into different orders, but all insects have some key features. And you can probably look at these insects here and think, yeah, I can recognize these as insects because there are things about their bodies and their legs that they all have in common. But all insects have key features that you can see here on this museum specimen. This is a scorpion fly. So it's a British insect, you get this in the UK, and it's got classic insect features. So when you look at its body, its head is this end here, and that's for sensing. It's got its eyes and antennae. It's also for feeding, so it's got these extensive jaws. Then you've got the thorax, the middle section, and that's for moving. So you've got these segmented legs attached to the thorax, 2 pairs of wings attached to the thorax. And then the third part of its body is the abdomen. So that's for digesting food and for reproduction. So it's a classic insect. It's got these 3 body parts, 6 legs, wings, and all the features that you expect to see on an insect. But insects are incredibly varied. There's a huge variety of insects. And I want you to look at this picture here and think about the variety of insects that you've got there. And think about dividing them into groups. So if you were to look at those insects, you could divide them up into smaller groups based on the features they share. Which numbers would you put together in a smaller group? Have a look at the insects you get there. Put that in the chat. Which insects you would put together in a smaller group? So, for example, you might put number 9, which is a sexton beetle. You might put that in the same group as number 3. This ladybird here. Okay, so Toby has said 1, 4, 5, and 11. 1 is the hornet, 4, 5, and 11. Yeah, that's actually quite a broad range there. This is number 1 is a hornet. Number 4 is a moth. It's a kind of moth called a hornet moth. So it's pretending to be a hornet. Number 5 is a great yellow bumblebee. And number 11 is a hoverfly. They're all in different groups, but they look similar to each other. They look similar to each other because they're mimicking each other. So the ones that can defend themselves are the hornet and the bumblebee, and the black and yellow is a warning colour. So the hornet moth, number 4, is trying to look like a hornet, and number 11, the hornet hoverfly, is trying to look like a hornet as well. So they use that colour to mimic each other. So they're not particularly closely related. Let me look down the chat and see what other combinations you got. 9, 12, and 3 together. 9 is the beetle, 12 is the minotaur beetle, and 3 is the ladybird. Yeah, so you'd put those together in the beetle group. 7 and 10. Thanks, Finley. 7 and 10, yeah, both flies. Number 7 is a bee fly, and number 10 is a Scottish midge. So they're both flies. You put those together. So the insect group is massive and incredibly diverse, but you can divide it up into smaller groups called orders. And in the UK, around 80% of all of our insects can be divided into 4 main orders. So these are all the orders, but there are 4 main ones in the UK. There's the Lepidoptera. That's another word for butterflies and moths. So that includes things like the emperor moth, the hornet moth, the large blue butterfly. Then you've got the Diptera, what's known as the Diptera. Diptera means 2 wings. Di for 2, and ptera is the wings. Diptera are the flies. So you've got the hoverfly, the bee fly, and the Scottish midge. And then the ants, bees, and wasps. They're in a group called the Hymenoptera, so membranous wings. And although the ant doesn't have wings, but there are winged forms or winged parts to the ant's life cycle. So the ants, bees, and wasps are in the Hymenoptera. And then the Coleoptera, the beetles, the sexton beetle, the ladybird, and the minotaur beetle. So yeah, you can divide these up into groups according to the features they share, but insects are very diverse. And the museum has a lot of them. And you might think, well, why does a museum have so many insects? We've inherited some insects from other collectors. So one of our collectors was a man called Frederick William Hope, and he put together an insect collection in the early 1800s, and we've inherited his collection. It's a really important collection of British insects, and we can see population changes from the 1840s and compare them to today. So having that collection is really useful for conservation. The Hope collection has been added to over time, and it also includes these things. Now, you might have studied these things in science GCSE. These are peppered moths. moths, but these are the peppered moths collected by a scientist called Bernard Kettlewell. And Bernard Kettlewell was the person who devised the experiments on peppered moths that showed natural selection in action. It's one of the few examples that shows natural selection in a timescale that humans can kind of log and understand, because it was over the course of the Industrial Revolution and then the introduction of the Clean Air Act. And that human impact is visible on the type of moths that you collect from those different periods. So when the air is clean, the common moth is the pale version that you can barely see in this picture. The less common one is the dark form. And when the air is polluted, the more common moth form is the darker form. And this changed over time, and it was showing that inherited characteristics become more or less common in populations. So it's a really useful example of natural selection in action, and that's why it's taught in many GCSE specifications. So those Kettlewell moths, or the peppered moths, are in the museum collection, in our museum collection, and sometimes on display, but often behind the scenes. So having this collection of insects allows you to track changes over time. And generally, when you start to look at how insect populations have changed over time, it's not a very optimistic story. I'm going to show you some headlines. Didn't mean to do that. I'm going to show you some headlines. I don't know if you caught all those words, and I want you to try and guess some of the missing words. Did you see them all? Do you want to write some of the words that complete those headlines in the chat? Unless I've actually spoiled it completely. Extinction, yeah, extinction is one of those words. Insect mass extinction, gone, yeah. Any other suggestions? Decline, there's something declines in there. Loss is in there. Shall I reveal the words? So insect mass extinction, insect apocalypse. Whenever you see insects in environmental news, it doesn't look very positive. You have to be wary of what you read. There's lots of stats about insects, and stats can be misleading. Sometimes where you sample can influence what you record, and scientists are attracted by the most biodiverse places. And if you go and sample in a place that's very diverse, and the populations change, the only change that's likely to be is a decline. Whereas if you sample in places that aren't as diverse to start off with, there might be more varied outcomes. And also, the frequency that things have sampled over time. Stats can be misleading, but it is fair to say that the overall picture is not very optimistic for particularly British insects. There are definite exceptions to that. This is one of my favourite exceptions. It's a large blue butterfly. It's never been very common in the UK. It's always been a rare butterfly. But in 1976, it disappeared. It was still found in Europe, but it disappeared in the UK. It became extinct in the UK. And there were several attempts to reintroduce the large blue butterfly, but they weren't successful. And that's because we didn't know enough about its ecology, enough about its biology. Large blue butterflies, they lay eggs, and the eggs hatch into these caterpillars that you can see on the left-hand side here. And these caterpillars live in ant nests, and they rely on ants. So the ants look after them. The ants look after the caterpillars, and they look after the caterpillars because they think they're baby ants. They don't look like baby ants. In this picture, this is the adult ant, you can see. And the adult ant is looking after the baby ants, which are these kind of white grub. And then this is a caterpillar of the large blue butterfly. So it doesn't look anything like a baby ant, but it does smell like a baby ant, and it does sound like a baby ant. What a baby ant sounds like, I have absolutely no idea. But it sounds like a baby ant, and the ants think it's a baby ant, and they look after it. So they defend it. They protect it, they nurture it, they take it to a safe place. In the meantime, this caterpillar eats baby ants. So it's not a particularly balanced mutualistic biological relationship there. It's a very much a sort of one-way benefit to the caterpillars. And it's safe in the nest, protected by the ants, unless the queen sees it. There's only one ant that knows it's not a baby ant, and that's the queen. If the queen sees it, it knows it's not a baby ant and it kills it. But as long as it manages to avoid the queen, then it's safe in the ant's nest. But it's a long story, but the short version is that you can't have the large blue butterfly unless you've got suitable habitat for the ants. So if you try and just introduce the large blue butterfly on its own, those introductions aren't successful. You have to introduce the large blue butterfly into a habitat that's suitable for not only the butterfly, but also the ants. And then the two will live side by side, and then the population will thrive. And it took a little while to kind of figure that out. And over the last 20 years, we've started to see a gradual increase in the large blue butterfly population, and it is becoming established again in the UK. So that's a really positive story, but that is quite unusual for insects. Most insect stories are negative. This is the great yellow bumblebee. So we've got these in the museum collection, and they have suffered over the last 70 years. So they were widespread, but now they're very rare, and they're restricted to northern Scotland. There's breeding populations in Orkney, the Outer Hebrides, and the north coast of Scotland. They're very restricted in their habitat. So that is a definite decline in that species, and that's more typical of the stories we hear about. Should we be worried about that decline in insects? Well, yes. Insects are incredibly useful for the production of food. We need insect pollinators. Many wild ecosystems rely on insect pollinators. So they're useful not only for people, but for the environment generally. And a decline in British insects is probably an indicator of a decline of other things. So fungi, plant diversity is probably all linked together. So when we see a decline in one, it's probably a hint that there's a decline in all of those things. So what can we do? Well, one thing we can do is try and understand why that is. And when you delve into that story, it appears that the human impact is the root of the cause. Now, here's a slide showing some photographs of what humans might do to the environment that has a negative effect on insects. If you remove wildflower meadows and wild habitats and build houses, then you're removing habitat, you're altering land use. When you produce food, you've got large areas of monoculture, and this does not support a diversity of insects. This crop here, this barley is wind pollinated, it's not supporting any insect pollinators. And if it was something that was insect pollinated, a monoculture is not going to support diversity. Pesticide use to produce sort of crops on the scale that we do is having a negative impact on insect diversity. And the last picture shows an extreme weather event. And extreme weather is a consequence of our changing climate. So all of these things are things that humans do that have a negative impact on human population. Now, some of these things here are linked to food. So when we produce crops, monoculture, that's about food production. When we're using pesticides, it's about crop productivity. So we use lots of pesticides in order to yield more crops. So that's about production of food. Extreme weather. Our eating habit has a carbon footprint, and when we make food choices, some of those choices are contributing to climate change. So some of these things are directly linked to our food production, but others are indirectly linked to food production. So food choices might be something we can think more carefully about, and that might have a positive impact on biodiversity more generally. the choice of what we choose to eat, how we produce that food, and how much of it we waste are all important questions. And one solution to the problem might be thinking of insects as a source of food. They can be produced in a carbon light way, in a sustainable way, and they're very nutritious. I'm just going to pause there for a second, and I just want to get your initial reaction to eating insects. So I'm going to delve into this a bit more in a bit more detail, but I want you to think, well, if faced with one of these menu choices, the eat, grub, snack, the things, yeah, they particularly appetized me. How do you feel about eating the things that are on the screen now? Put in the chat what those make you think of. Thanks, Toby. I think the top right might look quite tasty. It looks quite salty. Anybody else? If you had to eat some of these things, wouldn't be your first choice. I think particularly anything with visible legs. I'm always a bit wary of anything that's got legs that are quite like that. Good source of protein. Yeah, so a sort of mixed reaction there. I want to delve into this a little bit further and think about, okay, they are a good source of protein. Insects are a good source of protein. They're very nutritious. We should probably be starting to explore our food choices and broaden those out a bit. And they are a food source for lots of people all over the world. But how do we know they're safe? Producing insects is very different to how we produce our food currently. What's the impact of changing our production? I want to explore these questions in a bit more detail, and I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do a little bit of research. So the question that I'm going to come back to in the second part of the session is, should Cheney be the first school in Oxfordshire to serve insect-based products in the school canteen? Now, I want you to do a bit of research before coming back to that question. And I'm going to post in the chat in a second. I'm just because I've just said this. I'm going to post in the chat these resources, and each one is linked to like a short video or just a short bit of written information for, against, or unbiased for the argument for eating insects. So I'm going to copy these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 links, and I'm going to give you, I gave the other group 10 minutes. That felt about the right amount of time to have a look at 2 of those, to choose 2 that are different, so a for and against, or a neutral and against, or some combination that's presenting a different point of view. So just give me a second while I highlight these links and post them in the chat so you can open them. And then I'm going to switch my camera off and pause for 10 minutes. I hope that feels like the right amount of time and not too long, for you, give you a chance to have a look at these things. So let me just make sure that I've got those to you.